Hello, I'm Tal Curry. I'm glad to be with you all today. Let's make sure I've got everything working right. Here we go. Um, I'm here to present on Autism Resource Sheet and wanted to give you a little background about myself. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked as an elementary and middle school teacher. Oh, look at that. I've already made it go fast. Here we go. Turn that off. There we go. Um, so I've worked as an elementary and middle school teacher, child and family therapist, advocate, administrator of programs serving with children, youth, and families for over 25 years. Some of you may know me. I may be a familiar face, as I did work for the Department for Public Health and helped found some of the work on Kentucky Strengthening Families, which you all have done some wonderful programming with as well. So my passion comes from my experience serving as a DCPS foster and adoptive parent. I've adopted 3 unique children from different homes and fostered a child with autism. I also have an adoptive father and a sister and several nieces who are autistic. So the objectives for today will be to understand the purpose and how the resource guide was created, learn how to use the resource guide and key actions for users, and explore opportunities for how the resource guide and specific resources can be used in your work. I've added to this training, so this is an extra slide telling you a little bit more about the presentation. So this will be somewhat of an informal presentation. We'll have question and answer. But I will go over a brief overview of the Office of Autism, the Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism, a little bit about autism around background, communicating with autistic adults, and strategies to improve communication. And once again, as far as asking questions, I will have a question and answer at the end, but feel free to post your questions in the chat as we go along, and I will try to answer those as well. All right, well, I'm excited to be with you all here today and applaud the work that you all do. So, as the director for the Office of Autism, I'm an office of one. I'm housed in the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities within the cabinet. I'm staffed to the council, which includes the executive committee and then the 3 subcommittees. We have 3 lifespan subcommittees that include early childhood, school age, and adolescent and adult. You'll see the overlap that's somewhat intentional about transition ages. So we also have a website. We do several council projects. I answer a lot of constituent calls and emails, serve on state councils and other work groups, and we also do a biannual report to the governor. This is a slide from, or a picture to our right of the KYACA website. And here are some of the member agencies and organizations. The Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism was created back in 2016 legislatively and included these partners. It was mainly included or created for the purpose of helping state agencies do a better job of communicating and networking and ultimately collaborating to help people with autism across the lifespan. So there's some of the partners you can see. We have several within the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Another way to look at this, we have 2 co-chairs, one from UK and one from U of L. Again, most of the partners are state agencies with the exception of a few advocacy groups or specialized partners working out of UK U of L. But what I really appreciate is we have a total of 5 parents, a couple parents at large. University of Kentucky co-chair is a or the University of Kentucky has a parent. We also have University of Louisville, the Autism Center, and actually our co-chair is a parent. And then we have a parent from the Commonwealth Council on Developmental Disabilities. We believe very much in lived experience. And so we added 6 self-advocates. They're considered consumer representatives or self-advocates. Those 6 self-advocates include the UK co-chair, as well as 5 other self-advocates that have helped us do a better job of looking at lived experience. So you will see some language that may look a little bit different, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. But our vision for the Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism is autistics of all ages are engaged in self-determined lives and are valued citizens in the community. Our mission is to promote collaborative efforts and improve and advocate to improve systems of supports for autistics. And you'll notice we use words like support here. We try to stay away from words like intervention or therapy, because sometimes those have a different connotation for autistics, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The other thing that we've learned from autistics, and I've been involved since 2018 as the executive director, we increased the amount of self-advocates that we had on the council, and we very much believe in the people with lived experience being caregivers and parents, as well as having self-advocates' voice. So one example that we utilize is, even though the legislation indicates that we're the Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD, the current council has amended the title to be KYACA to just be Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism, as we believe this reflects and honors autism through a strength-based perspective and the social model of disability. And the council promotes neuroaffirming approach to the work that we do. So what is autism? You will see lots of definitions. I will probably have a couple different definitions in here, but I like the words a neurodevelopmental disability characterized by social and communication differences and the need for sameness or repetition. These differences may be expressed in a variety of ways. For example, communication differences in autism can include non-speaking, speaking only rarely or in specific situations, talking much less or much more than the average person, speaking more quietly or more loudly, speaking at a little slower or faster pace, speaking with flat affect or in a sing-song manner, speaking robotically or using character voices, whispering, or speaking only about one or two topics. This is really true for both social and the sameness components of autism. You'll notice that it's not just one general statement on autism. This was also created by autistics, this definition, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what is autism? One way to look at autism is some people may need a lot of help in their daily lives, while others may only need a little. It's important to think about the individual when determining what supports may be needed. And these differences can look like or may seem to be the way the person thinks, the way they experience senses, the way they communicate or speak, the way they move, and the way they socialize. You have to be careful generalizing. I might say that some autistics, or some people might say that some autistics don't have great gross motor skills, but I have seen autistics who are incredible athletes. So you just can't, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Autistic people often have these sensory differences, such as being more sensitive or less sensitive than other people to sensory input, such as light, sound, clothing, or temperature. So another way to look at this is autism is a dynamic disability. This was created by an autistic, and I'll read it here for you. Autism is a dynamic disability. What this means is capacity and functioning are not concrete and may fluctuate depending on factors such as the environment, cognition, executive function, processing capacity, interoception, exteroception, neurofatigue, anxiety, communication differences, burnout, and sensory overwhelm. This means autistics may be capable of a task one day, but unable to perform the task another. So it's fluid. And it's also what we would call an invisible disability, as well as a dynamic disability. Another way to look at autism from a sense or the senses is from fight, flight, or freeze. This was an autistic graphic created by an autistic. And I like the quote under, autistic people consistently experience physical discomfort and anxiety as a result of sensory issues. And again, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And Stephen Shore quoted that, and I think that is very true to how we look at autistics. Some of the things that autistics can struggle with is social rejection, exclusion, and isolation. Multiple studies show that neurotypicals, or we as non-autistics, are inclined to instantly dislike and avoid autistic people. And I'll talk a little bit more about that research and sometimes the struggles that folks with autism have. So here's another way to view autism. If you look at the spectrum on the left, the linear spectrum, this is the more neurotypical view. It's what It's based on the medical model or the DSM-5 text revision, or what's used in the educational model or the IEP um, system in education. So you have level 1 needs some support, level 2 needs substantial support, number 3 needs very substantial support. And that's part of the diagnostic criteria. Um, and it is very linear. But what autistics have taught us is that autism is more like a color wheel. So if you look to the right, and almost like a dartboard, I could say, again, some folks with gross motor skills may some autistics with gross motor skills, or many autistics with gross motor skills, are not quite as coordinated, but that's not always true. So it's like throwing a dart up there. Language, motor skills, executive functioning, sensory issues are all different. And this embraces more of the neurodiversity paradigm. It aligns with the social model of disability, which is very different than the educational or medical model. And it also comes from a neuroaffirming approach. And if you'd like to learn more about the color wheel, there's a source there at the bottom of the page. And I will bring up some other resources here in just a moment that may be helpful as well. So as we get into this presentation, you will notice that there's some QR links. This resource was one that I added. It's autism and co-occurring disabilities. And those co-occurring disabilities, ADHD, anxiety, intellectual disability, epilepsy, gastrointestinal disorders, PTSD, sleep disorders, and depression, can all affect autistics differently. But what we know is that research indicates that almost 50%, or the average is 50%, struggle with ADHD. Some would say, as far as anxiety, somewhere between 80 and 90%, I could say maybe even higher, have some experience with anxiety. 10 to 20% of autistics have epilepsy, compared to only 1.5% of the non-autistic people have epilepsy. PTSD affects 4.5% of the non-autistics or our population. And research suggests that autistic people are impacted from PTSD from 30 to 60%. Examples of this, there's evidence from one study that indicates 9 autistic women out of 10 have been victims of sexual violence. Depression is 4 to 8 times greater in autistics than non-autistics. And so these are just some things to keep in mind. This is a resource that was created by ISOL. You will see down here at the right, bottom right, Innovative Supports for Autistic Workers. You can get to it both by the link, or if you want to take a picture with your phone. And I didn't mention at the beginning, if you have your phone out, that may be helpful, because there'll be some other resources that I will share through the slides. But again, you will have access to the slides after the training. So stimming. One of the things that autistic people may engage in are stimming behaviors. And many of us stim. As you think about this, you'll be in meetings and you'll think about people who they tap their toe, or their legs jiggle quite a bit, or they have a hard time sitting down. But that's stimming. And stimming with autism may include rocking. It may include flapping, and you'll see people with their hands up flapping, playing with a toy, doodling, the need to move around the room. But this does not mean they're not paying attention. In fact, engaging in these activities, these stimming behaviors, can help autistic people better focus on what is going on around them. So the autistic community often says we can either look like we're paying attention to you, or we can actually be paying attention to you. So they may not be making eye contact. They might be rocking, flapping, playing with a toy, doodling, moving some. And that behavior looks inattentive, but is in fact ensuring that the autistic people can be able to access and participate in the conversation. So it should be made clear to you all as FRYSC staff and others that you work with that this behavior is acceptable and should be celebrated. Eye contact and body language. So many people with autism report finding eye contact disorienting or even painful. Autistic sensory systems work best on one track at a time. Looking at a person who is speaking to appear respectful or normal can interfere with the process of understanding words. Understanding autistic body language is the best way to avoid unintentional discrimination. So, non-speaking autistics. We know that we have folks that are non-speaking. Probably around 30% of the population of autistics are non-speaking. But that doesn't mean that they can't understand what people say. So they generally understand what people are saying. Many of them have receptive language skills, but they have things that they want to express. They may or may not have an intellectual disabilities, but they certainly do communicate. So what should you do? Speak normally, address the person directly, include them in everything, use the communication methods they understand, learn to listen and be patient. And I'll have some other slides about that. This is also another resource created by an autistic, as well as an autistic graphic designer. So non-speaking people or non-speaking autistic people, about 30% of the population is non-speaking. It's not a sign of intellectual disability, but there is about 30 to 40% of the population of autism that does struggle with intellectual disabilities. So you cannot assume that a person does or does not have intellectual disability based on the ability to speak. A person may use a tablet or communication device. This is called augmentative or alternative communication, or AAC. If a non-speaking person does not use AAC, they will most likely have an advocate or support person to speak for them. If not, you should ask if they need a support person or would like a tablet or a pen to communicate with. Always speak directly to an autistic person in any situation, including non-speaking autistics. Where you would normally speak directly to a non-autistic, you should also do that with a non-speaking autistic. If needed, an advocate or support person will help the person respond. So try not to do not interpret looking away, volume of responses, either loud or quiet, fidgeting, movement, noises aside from speech to be disrespectful, or indicators of interest, intelligence, or ability. And I saw that Maria Thomas put in the co-occurring resource in the chat if you're watching that. So thank you very much, Maria Thomas. Augmentative and alternative communication devices. So some autistic people use methods other than their voice to speak, as I mentioned. So an AAC device might be something like a text-to-speech device, like an iPad. And you'll see one of many different resources there at the bottom of the page. And then to the right of the page, I always encourage people to have an emergency communication board, and I will share a resource to that. There is a small QR code to that U of L Kentucky Autism Training Center resource, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Here are different forms of alternative or augmentative communication. Could include an iPad with a communication ad. It could include text to speech on a phone. Some use ASL and other sign languages. Some just use an alphabet board, and then some have flip books and with picture cards, especially you will see that more so in early childhood. So one of the things that I'm doing today is speaking about autism, and as well as sharing this autism diagnostic resource sheet. So this autism diagnosis resource sheet was developed by autistics as well as other university partners, healthcare providers, university faculty, school staff, and was really a collaborative effort through our early childhood subcommittee on the Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism. When we came up with this resource, it was really geared towards just children, but what we found is it's really been helpful for all. We're actually in the process of updating it. So you will see this one says Autism Diagnostic Resource Sheet, and that is the resource that I will be sharing with you. And I will also give you a copy of, or you'll get a copy of at the end of this presentation. If you printed it out, it would be 3 pages. So that's why I have these 3 pages to the right kind of put together. It has 8 categories, but also have the QR code if you want to look this up. Now, if you go to this QR code or the website, it may say, or it will say, New Autism Diagnostic or Diagnosis Resource Sheet. And that just indicates that there were a few mistakes on that, as well as a few edits that we've made. And we're getting ready to finalize a couple more edits, and then we will get that up on the website. So you are getting that early. So I don't want you to be confused upon what you get from me, which will work, and actually has a couple corrected resources. So resource guide structure, there's 8 support categories. There are different colors that you can see. Again, another QR code if you want to click on this. Learn more about autism, connect with other family members, get to know autistic self-advocates, establish school plans, seek desired supports and services, explore the larger disability community, support participation, and additional resources. As well as I have included a couple of the resources that I will share that are not part of this resource guide, but I will make sure that I point those out. So again, this was created with autistics. It has very simple language. We may be updating a little bit of this language, but we want people to learn about autism. Learning about autism will help you appreciate why your child feels or acts in certain ways. This is the language that's above. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disability reflecting differences in brain. This includes communication, social differences, as well as intense and sometimes unusual interests and different movement needs, similar to the last definition, but a little bit different. Again, created by another autistic group of people. Every autistic person experiences autism differently. It's currently believed that 2 to 3% of our population of autistic people are in our population. That's that 1 in 36 from the CDC is 2.78%. But what's most important is we're trying to, as people get newly diagnosed, whether they're children, youth, or adult, is teaching folks that it's not about finding a cure. Autism is not a disease, but a valid human way of thinking and being. So as you go through these resources, you'll notice that this was some of the language under Learn More About Autism at the top of the page that I just read. The resources are hyperlinks. So each one of these resources, what is autism, would go to this resource here, and that's the website. About Autism would go to the advocacy or Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. The Autism 101 is actually training that you can get. The Meaning of Self-Advocacy is a wonderful book called The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, but it has some good information there. And then Books About Autism is a Google Doc. So if you clicked on any of these links, that's where you'd end up. But Books About Autism, the Google Doc includes, the last time I looked, 158 books. It includes books for parents, children's books, middle school age books, young or middle grade books, young adult, and there's both fiction and nonfiction in those. There's adult fiction books and then adult nonfiction books. So there's resources about general information on autism, dating, gender, sexual or sexuality, employment, self-help, and a book for teachers. And we're always looking to add to that list. And it's a group of autistics that keeps this list up and has approved these resources. So for example, if you clicked on the books about autism, here are some of the autism books for parents. And so you can see some of the books here. They aren't just specifically autism books, like The Explosive Child is an excellent book for therapists and parents with difficult children. It's not written just for autistics, but it's an excellent book. And then you'll see some of the other autism books. So that gives you an idea of some of the resources. This slide is an additional slide, and I put this under here because I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of environmental triggers for autistics. So noise from a crowded room. So you might see folks flapping versus clapping in a crowded room, or telling people to do thumbs up. Increased anxiety and feeling like a lack of control is what autistics feel in certain environments. Artificial lighting, like I mentioned earlier, lighting in general can be difficult, but the light itself, artificial lighting, can be hard on some folks' eyes. Some can hear the hum of these lights. Many places they have no or minimal sunlight. We have to remember that meeting or forgetting to meet basic needs can sometimes be an environmental trigger because of executive functioning issues. Some autistics sometimes forget to meet their basic needs. So going to the bathroom, eating, sleeping, some food sensitivity issues, texture, smell, taste. Some only eat a few foods. Sometimes I hear stories about kids. It's a celebration in a family when a child's got 10 foods that they will eat in early childhood. I know a teenager that has a lot of struggles, and they have him up to 50 foods that he now eats. So thinking about that, there's a lot of triggers. Sometimes what I tell folks to keep on hand is gum, mints, flavoring packets for water. Certainly you can keep other snacks as well, but you want to think about things like some folks struggle from communal eating and being around certain smells. I use the example tuna salad because one autistic talks about how she used to have a hard time going to her work um, lunchroom to be with others because there were folks that had tuna salad in there or other things that smelled and kept her from wanting to be in there, even though sometimes she was trying to push herself to be there. Sleeping, going to sleep, and remaining to sleep are certainly triggers or challenges for autistics. The way to help with some of these is looking at softer lighting, lamps versus overhead lights, or taking the overhead lights and actually unscrewing them a bit or only having a few on. Minimal noise. A lot of times autistics will be benefited by having head noise canceling headphones if they're able to wear them. Some autistics will have their earbuds in, and I wouldn't take that as offense because sometimes that is helping them focus. They may have one in and one out while they're talking to you. It's okay to inquire and ask if it's a accommodation that they need. Soft furniture, couch, pillows, bean bags, places where folks can unwind. Stress balls, spinners, fidget cubes, chewable jewelry. Oftentimes trying to find a sensory room or creating a quiet room. When you see these in schools, it's exciting where you may see them in some places have a dedicated room, but you certainly see teachers creating these spaces. And I know many of you have probably seen the benefit if you can create a space. I've seen spaces like this created out of small closets even. Soft nose machine, weighted blankets, puzzles, art supplies are oftentimes helpful. Adult or child coloring books are also things that can be helpful for autistics to help with some of their sensory issues and to help them stem or allow them to also pay attention and focus on what you are trying to work with them on. Other things to just think about, and oftentimes I talk to people about, is even if you don't have a lot of space in a classroom, small kids tent, if you cover it with a large dark tarp to cover it, make that more of dark space, that tent. Having grab bags with prepared sensory items for when there are struggles or when you know that there's going to be a transition that's going to be difficult. Those could be helpful. If known, making sure a visual daily schedule and transition cues are utilized. So it's all that good early childhood stuff that needs to be a part of some of the accommodations made for autistics. Yes, having pull-ups and adult diapers can sometimes be helpful. Extra underwear, changes of clothes, which you all are pros at, usually. Extra electronic device plugs like smartphones, iPads, tablets. This was created for a disaster situation, but I thought some of these might be helpful. A communication tool printed out, which I will come back to, clear signage, and certainly the ability to type versus talk on a tablet or phone. And saying that, I have autistics that will visit through Zoom, and they may just get to the point where they no longer can visit, or a couple of them don't visit through Zoom, but they constantly are writing in the chat, and they can write and get words out easier than they can verbally talking, which I'm the exact opposite. I don't type that quick, so I do much better speaking out loud. All right, so moving along with some of the resources, connect with other family members. This is an important way that we think all folks who have gotten a diagnosis with autism, they need to have autistic supports. Family members in particular need to be learning from other families, and they can help navigate life. We also created quite a few autistic or included some autistic resources under this. So you'll notice in this category, connect with other families, that there's a Start Here guide. This was created by autistics. It's a guide for parents of autistic children or autistic kids. I've got the QR code there. It is exactly the link down here, Start Here guide. It's the first bullet. So when you click on that bullet, you get to the Start Here guide. It'll open that up and it actually gives you the ability to download that guide. I think it's a 40-page document, but it's written in plain language and wonderful for autistics, as well as family members to learn more about autism. So one thing I like to throw in there is you've heard me use the word autistic quite a bit. I know, and I was trained that that person first language is important. It was a part of how I was trained with talking about people with disabilities. But we do know that autism and many autistics have actually embraced um, utilizing more of that identity first language, being called autistic, much like the deaf and hard of hearing population, because they see autism as a, permanent, significant, pervasive piece of who they are. Um, so there's some examples there, they would rather be called autistic than an autistic person even. And then I always tell folks that as you're working with families or individuals, that it's fine to ask do you have a preference between being called autistic or a person with autism? Uh, or do you prefer other words? And that's usually how I address that. Certainly both are correct, depending on people's experience. So speaking of autistic people, and these are a couple slides that aren't directly from the resource guide, but I wanted to make sure you had these. If you're speaking to autistic people of any age, they tend to respond better to communication that is clear. Terms are defined. There's no unfamiliar words or ambiguity. Try not to have any sudden changes in expectations, and you're consistent in your communication, you're concise, no extra information. So many of us from that Southern perspective that we oftentimes tell stories or talk about things that aren't always rational or that can sometimes be difficult to understand. The extra language is not helpful. So you want to be authentic, factual or logical, calm and non-emotional. They may have, oftentimes have difficulties with unfamiliar figures of speech, insincere social customs, open-ended questions. They may need some redirection for some specific small talk, like I mentioned, chit chat, or words or phrases with multiple meanings. I'll give you a couple other examples. So try to use language that's unambiguous. Sorry. The phrase like "please stand by" usually means to wait, but autistic people process information differently and might hear "remain in a standing position." So it's better to be direct and use words that are much clearer. Slow down. I'm obviously talking pretty quick today, and I apologize for that. You don't have to speak every word more slowly, but it is helpful to pause between sentences to allow the person time to process. A long pause before answering does not indicate resistance to instruction but it's often common for autistic people to need this time for processing. Autistic people are often more able to follow instructions when they're given a reason. If they ask for a reason, they do not mean to be disrespectful. They often times are trying to access the resources they need to comply. I have seen autistics know school policies or facility policies better than most staff because they've memorized what the rule. So they can become very stressful for staff who are like, oh, they've actually read some of these student hand guides and other things, and they've memorized word for word. And so they may quote sometimes policies that we know life is much grayer than policies are written. So you're going to help them understand why a policy was enacted in a certain way, and they were unable to understand the gray there. So if you're asking questions, one question at a time, two-part questions may result in less information being exchanged. Too many open-ended questions can lead to rambling or tangential responses. So it can be difficult for autistic people to know what information is relevant to others. If you need to ask an open-ended question, such as, can you describe what happened on Friday night? Be prepared to redirect if the person gets off topic. Use short, specific questions where possible, and add qualifiers like Friday night between 9 and midnight or at the ballpark before the incident so that you have some specificity in what you're asking. Expect for the response to take longer than the average person. These are just some reminders that I wanted to throw in there. Going back to the resource guide, getting to know autistic self-advocates, this is probably one of the most important things that we believe autistic adults are experts in autism. I oftentimes talk about how the best thing that we can do is find an autistic mentor for a child or a youth or even a young adult who's newly diagnosed. They can be the best resource as far as finding and understanding what it's like to have autism. You can oftentimes find autistics connecting in chat rooms, social networks, and some local autism support groups. Um, so Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is one, and you'll see the 4 bullets below. Uh, the first one or the second one down is Kentuckiana Autism Spectrum Alliance, which is a Facebook page and has a Gmail account. This QR code will take you to it, but it's also linked in this resource. Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the one that was above that, is right here, and this takes you to one page of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and it talks about the autism. One of the mottos of the disability community, and certainly the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, is nothing about us without us. So they need to be, autistics need to be involved whenever autism is discussed. And it shouldn't be non-autistic people making decisions about autism without autistic input. So another resource, if you dig into Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, they have many great resources, like they have the Start Here guide, but they have this resource, Plain Accessible and Inclusive Organizing of Trainings. I like this quick list that I pulled out of there. It talks about, number one, loud or unpredictable noise, motion, and stimuli. So autistic people can be sensitive to a variety of external stimuli, such as noises, certain sights, brightness, smells, and sudden movements. It can be difficult for autistics to process the stimuli. Some common stimuli that can cause access issues are microphone feedback, bright, fluorescent, or flashing lights, perfume body sprays, the sound of people eating, sirens, alarms, and loud music. If an autistic person encounters one of these situations, it could cause sensory overload, leaving them unable to participate in the rest of whatever event or meeting you may be having. Unpredictable events, and there's another 9 or 10 there, but just things that match what we were talking about earlier. But this, if you were to click on this guide, it gives you quite a bit of detail and description under each one of these 10 ideals to make autistic participation more accessible versus these things that can create inaccessibility. So another thing that came from that resource I just mentioned was if you are creating resources, it's helpful to have a list of common accommodations that autistic participants can check off or can be available to them. One might be Braille, larger print, sign language interpreter, a note taker, access to a break room, bringing a support person, learning and speech disability accommodations that could include written instructions, having someone to read documents out loud, using personal computers and tablets, or using speech recognition software. All of those things that you see at school or should be available to people at school, depending on their needs. As we go through the resource guide, the next section is establish school plans. Obviously, this is a very important thing for you all, but what I like to point out is some of the resources that are here. Besides just talking about IDEA or the Individuals with Disability Education Act and IEPs, we encourage folks at public schools to look into those. We know not every child's going to qualify for an IEP under autism, but they may qualify for a 504 plan through the Section 504 of the Rehab Act. And we mentioned that as a private school resource, but you all know it's also a resource in public schools. Each one of these links, the first one goes to First Steps or the Kentucky Early Intervention System, a listing of Kentucky state-funded preschool coordinators. And then the third one is this Kentucky Autism Guidance document that was updated from the original one that I want to say was 80 to 90 pages, created for educators by KDE. This copy, I think, has 41 pages and should be a much nicer resource. Whoops. jumped a little quick, should be a great resource for you all as educators or working with people that are advocating and wanting to make sure that IEPs are done correctly for their children with autism if they qualify. The other resource on here is Kentucky Spin publications and videos. I love what Kentucky Spin's done over the last couple of years. If you clicked on that link, you would get to this list of resources. It's probably even changed from the last time, but it has everything from executive functioning to self-care goals to IEP. It has 504 information. It has both videos as well as one-page infographics that can be excellent for kids and families of all ages. So as you go further down on the resource sheet, the purple section, Seek Desired Supports and Services, really kind of talks about what are some of the ways that families and others should be seeking supports. And so it includes, again, the Kentucky Early Intervention System, Early Childhood Mental Health Contact List, and I'll talk about this autism affirming support descriptions. But what's most important is probably also what's down here in the purple, and that includes this specific text over here to the right says specific supports and services like art, play, speech, occupational, physical therapy, or mental health supports are available across Kentucky. You can access these in your region by collaborating with your primary care doctor or case manager through your child's insurance company. So MCOs, knowing families oftentimes don't realize that they can get case management services through their MCOs. That oftentimes to get occupational speech therapy, they've got to have a primary care doctor's referral to a support like that. And you also notice that some of the resources on here, it doesn't mention ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, because this was created with autistics. Some autistics have struggled with PTSD from and trauma from ABA that's been utilized as oftentimes they got older. And so we left on here mental health supports. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with the autism affirming support description. So if you click on that third bullet down, it would open to this Google Doc page that includes, and these are just some of the resources, a little bit more about ABA, also about how social skills groups sometimes aren't as helpful with neurotypicals or done by neurotypicals if they don't fully understand autism. They still can be helpful for many autistics, but it gives you some pause there. Some information about alternative and augmentative communication, evidence-based practices for autism, including different play therapy and other therapies that aren't ABA. You'll see art therapy above, speech therapy, occupational therapy. So those resources are there. Explore the Larger Disability Community has some wonderful resources there about the disability rights kind of timeline, disability justice. It has a lot of good social justice resources there, and we find this is something that as autistic youth get a little bit older, they can learn a little bit more about self-advocacy here, as well as adults learning more about some of the challenges with living in the disability community and resources to help them. So support participation. And as you go through this tool, this was created with the idea of early childhood. So it says there are common challenges families experience in their daily lives. These tips and toolkits can help support the needs of your autistic child to participate in activities of daily living. This is the little blurb right above the blue resources area. The blue resources here, all of these above resources, if you clicked on them, they are resources that are from Kentucky or national or international sources that were created with autistics. And the difference there is if you Googled, or many parents Googled feeding issues or toileting, you might get something pulled up by Autism Speaks. And Autism Speaks, many autistics struggle with Autism Speaks because a lot of their initial efforts were around finding a cure for autism, language that wasn't always as appropriate. And most importantly, they didn't have autistics around the table to begin with. Some of that I hear is improving, but these are going to be resources that will look different than resources that oftentimes families Google and get and they cover some of the important topics, especially in early childhood and even through adult. Um, I mentioned other supports. I think I mentioned that on the other slide. The next couple pages, yes, are other supports. And I added these here just as a reminder that some autistics, including those with intellectual disabilities, may need a support person, like I mentioned earlier. They may need help daily living activities like eating, getting from place to place, administering medications. I know some autistics who might have lower support needs, or once were called high functioning, which we don't use that term anymore, or Asperger's, but they still need to have reminders on their phone, other executive functioning things that help them so that they don't miss taking medications, so they don't miss, making sure that they eat something, because low blood sugar affects all of us. And I know I'm speaking to the choir because many of you struggle with that, I'm sure, at schools, because getting a lunch is sometimes difficult. Support people can help an individual facilitate communication through a speech device. During an emergency or crisis situation, a disabled person may not have a support family or member, so it's important that you have the ability to request a support person or someone that knows that individual, if it's a student, can help accommodate that child or that student, especially in the time of a disaster situation or crisis or fire alarms, tornado drills, all those fun things that sometimes create panic in many kids, but obviously many autistics particularly struggle with that. So other supports and these safety resources are going to be added, I believe, to the sheet eventually, but if you click on this QR code here or QR link, you would get to the University of Louisville, Kentucky Autism Training Center, and you get this page pulled up below, safety resources, and it's got many different things you can click on down here that can be helpful. It's a great resource for families, but it's also a great resource for teachers, parents, and certainly you all as supports to parents and teachers in your role as FRYSC staff. I mentioned the other supports. This is where you can find communication boards. These can be printed out easily through U of L. This is actually part of a sensory bag that was given to first responders to utilize, like law enforcement, to keep in their cars, so that if a child was in an accident or an autistic person, and what you will find, even other folks who have been traumatized lose the ability to speak, even if they are able to speak. And so sometimes having these can be life-saving as far as being able to use as an emergency communication board. The emergency communication board, this slide on the left, or this long graphic with the on the left is one side of it, the right is the other side, and in the middle it's a communication board, the QR code. And when you open this QR code, it'll take you to what the bottom of this page looks like, which is resources to download and print. And it includes this emergency communication board. So the last resource that is, or last section of resources or categories, is additional resources. And we said information is power. These toolkits and other resources for families to explore, supplement other action areas of this resource sheet. It was created with the idea of putting some other checklists and other things that could be helpful for families as well as autistics. So the first one is supported decision making. It's the second one down here. If you clicked on that, and if you're not familiar with supported decision making, it's a wonderful resource. There's My Choice Kentucky that has some, this is the project website that it will pull up. But from here, you can get to tools like on guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. You can get to other tools for families about thinking about how a person might be able to function with some supports, but not needing full guardianship, for example. If you click on the life course tools, this gets you to a wonderful tool for actually early childhood through adult. And it's a good way of looking at what are some of those life skills or executive functioning skills that people need to be able to have, and that many of us, as we graduate high school, still need the supports in. But certainly through your lifespan, it gives an idea of these different categories. Um, and you can create your own resource list or go through that with a family, looking at these life course tools. Probably one of the most important checklists is the family youth employment checklist, which are really transition checklists. There are checklists from age 3 to 5 for children of families with a child age 6 to 10, families age 11 to 15, but then there's also one for youth 11 to 15, youth 16 to 18. And each one includes a vision statement example and a vision statement template. So I will show you what one of these looks like. If you clicked on the employment checklist for youth age 16 to 18, um, there'd be about 4 pages. These are 2 of them. For a student with disabilities, it has everything under there, like have you created a stable account, looking at safety tips. But here's that example of a vision statement. And this was created by a group of folks with children, well, both youth and families who have disabilities. So it's a great resource. The employment checklist continues. You've got lots of other things that can check off on here and these resource boxes that you can connect to, like social security, SSI 101, disability or 101, which is a great resource from Carolyn Wheeler and Jeff White at UKHDI, Medicaid waivers, the stable accounts, other safety tips, student-directed IEP video, and so on. So I oftentimes encourage folks to look at that, be aware of it. It's a great resource to have on hand to share with families. Another resource that isn't on the sheet directly, but I mentioned earlier, is from the Innovative Supports for Autistic Workers. And if you were to open this QR code or this link, it would take you to a little bit more information about ISAW, but in particular, you would be able to get to these fact sheets. I find that these fact sheets, even though they're created for employers, like here's an accessibility checklist on the left for autism related meetings. Well, it has possible barriers, fluorescent lights, natural light or lamps, and suggested resources for accessibility, possible self-accommodations, and it does that throughout the sheet. It also was created by autistics, both an autistic graphic designer as well as another resource advocate. Boy, it wants to keep moving on its own. Let's see if I can get that turned off. It also has the positive characteristics for autistic workers. It's also where the co-occurring resources list came from. So it's another great resource that I suggest people look at. Lastly, one of the things that's new to ISAW is they've created an autistic informed employers resource. What it is each employer, and it can include school districts, it can include FRYSCs, but they've created a list of, like, I know all the Metro Louisville public libraries are getting trained as autistic informed employers. It's a self-training module that you can go to. If you click on the QR code that's over there to the right, it allows for individuals to do it or for programs to do it. But what I've told folks is even though some of the videos that you'll find on the other pages are geared towards employers, they're written by and created by autistics, and they give a nice overview of what is autism, what are some of the things I've talked about in this video already. And this training in particular through UKHDI allows folks to get a certificate or be termed as an innovative support for autistic worker and be part of the autistic informed employers. So that's, if you print out the brochure, that's what it would look like. But most importantly, that ISAW link over there will take you to that resource. Whew. And then additional resources. So as I said, these were 6 of the additional resources that are on there now, but at the bottom, very bottom of the page, it says, please complete the KYACA, or Kentucky Advisory Council on Autism, Early Childhood Resource Sheet Survey. Well, if you opened that up, it would get you this Survey Monkey link, or here's the link directly. And we encourage folks to give us feedback. It's a way that we can keep updating resources as we go along. And I have talked a lot. I think I'm to the point where, yes, I will do question and answer in just a second. Here's my contact information, um, our website, as well as my work cell phone number on here. And before we get to question and answer, I will mention the last two slides are references to some of the things that I mentioned, stats and figures. Those references are on the last two pages. So question and answer. If you want to take yourself off mute, or Quentin can help me with looking at folks who have questions, I will stop sharing so I can see faces. What questions do you all have? And I see in there some nice comments. Thanks for the great resources. This has been so informative, and I thank you. And I thank you all. I know I went all the way up to time, it looks like, which I did not intend to do, but if you have questions, feel free to contact me, tal.curry or talt.curry@ky.gov. Um, the information will be on that third to last slide.
This is Tamisha Ford. I have a question.
Yes,
I was wondering, are you ever available to present to schools? I think this would be like a great professional development for teachers.
I'm willing to do that. Yes. What I found is whether I do it or someone else, sometimes the Kentucky Autism Training Center may
Okay.
already have some work going on in particular schools, but I always check with them first because some schools will have a training cohort going through.
Okay.
And part of that cohort is not only to get trained, but also to provide some training to everyone in the schools. But I'm more than willing to share, as well as if you want to share this recorded video, that's fine as well.